The honourable member for Flamborough-Glanbrook.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for always pronouncing that correctly. I would like to note that I'll be splitting my time with the honourable member for Langley-Aldergrove. It's always an honour to rise in this House, and today to speak on Bill C-33, the Strengthening the Port and Railway Safety in Canada Act. And that's just the short title. It's a bill that actually amends 7 existing acts of Parliament. But for a bill that does that, it accomplishes very little. Wow. Although I believe in the importance of improving the security of Canada's transportation system and urgent action is needed to fix our supply chain issues, this bill fails incredibly short in achieving either of those goals. Mr. Speaker, the reality is this bill is all optics and no results. It's your typical Liberal legislation. It's a box-ticking exercise that creates the illusion that something is being done about a problem that the government has ignored for too long, because we know that foresight, planning, and operational excellence and managerial competence are not in this Liberal government's wheelhouse. But actually, Mr. Speaker, it's worse than that. This bill increases red tape and regulatory burdens, forcing more costs to be downloaded to consumers. And at a time, in these inflationary times, that's the last thing Canadians can afford. It chokes the tenants and users of our ports. It stymies what should be a drive for efficiency and international competitiveness, while failing to address the root causes of supply chain congestion, and failing to establish that decisions made by the ports must be in the best interests of the supply chain and the national economy. Guess what? More government is not the answer. Rather than looking to the best ports in the world that are the gateways to their continents and countries, that are significant economic drivers for their regions and their countries, like the Port of Rotterdam in the Netherlands, the country of my heritage, which is the largest in Europe, and it's the gateway to Europe, and it is hailed as the smartest port in the world. So rather than learning from these experts and taking a serious look at what Canada could do differently, we are stuck at the bottom again. Mr. Speaker, how is it that the Port of Vancouver, our main gateway to and from Asia, ranks 368th of 370 ports around the world in efficiency, the 3rd worst in the world? How did we get here? In 2017 and 2018, Transport Canada initiated 2 separate reviews with the goal of determining the necessary steps that would address supply chain issues and help avoid them in the future. And Mr. Speaker, that was 5 or 6 years ago. The best Liberals could come up with is a bill that is a bunch of nothing. What a missed opportunity. Mr. Speaker, what about the Liberals' own supply chain task force? Did they listen to the supply chain stakeholders and transportation experts that they assembled? You know, the world reached supply chain crisis 2 years ago, and it was brewing before that. And for a government that is good at convening, they convened. They brought together government and industry, logistics specialists, shippers, producers, transporters, manufacturers, and more. Good people, smart people. So let's give them some credit for that. But did the government listen to them? They even produced a fancy report with a colorful cover, and it was called Action, Collaboration, Transformation, cleverly spelling out the acronym ACT. But they didn't act. Mr. Speaker, the National Supply Chain Task Force report, in its introductory line, said that Canada's transportation supply chain is nearing its breaking point. Near its breaking point. So how do we fix this? How could we act? What action could the government take now and into the future to fix it? On page 34 and 35 of the report are the answers, is the meat of it. There are summary tables in a Gantt chart format that have 13 immediate response actions, 8 long-term strategic actions. So the minister welcomed this report with much fanfare. That was October 6th. That's over 8 months ago. So what has happened since? How many of those 13 immediate, that's immediate now, and 8 strategic recommended actions does Bill C-33 address? A handful? Any at all? The answer is 0. Mr. Speaker, we're talking about shipping Canadian goods, our trade, the lifeblood of our economy? And how does 8 months later, no immediate actions, none of which would actually require to be legislated? How is it that none of those are done? Mr. Speaker, urgent action is needed to address the worsening supply chain congestion. We also need to get to the root causes of supply chain congestion. The strategic recommendations would go a long way to, pardon the pun, turn this ship around. But they're nowhere to be found in Bill C-33. Mr. Speaker, how else is Bill C-33 flawed? Well, I'll go back to the red tape burden. There are new reporting requirements that will reduce the efficiency, effectiveness, and competitiveness of Canadian ports. Those are a particular burden on smaller ports, who can't be ignored for their critical role in moving goods in the country and fueling our trade corridors and driving economic activity. And Mr. Speaker, where else does Bill 33 fall down? It doesn't resolve the lack of financial flexibility that our ports need. How do they compete with the best in the world? How do they modernize when they're prevented from assessing the private sector funds needed to make investments and grow? We visited as a Transport Committee the Port of St. John's. They have a borrowing capacity of $4 million. That is effectively maybe one house in the Greater Vancouver area, maybe two in the Greater GTA. It's a small amount, and that's preventing them from growing. And other ports are facing similar challenges. On rail safety, Mr. Speaker, Bill C-33 really only makes modest changes that reflect existing practices. That's it. After all these years, nothing. What is a new offense for interfering and tampering with rail lines going to accomplish when the police already have the authority to act on that? It isn't a problem of authority, it's a lack of enforcement. What other changes to modernize the rail system should be considered in Bill C-33? Again, a missed opportunity. And one last point, Mr. Speaker, the bill also gives a tremendous amount of new power to the Minister of Transportation. More government, more red tape, and unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, in the case of this minister, one that doesn't act quickly, if at all, as we saw in the holiday travel chaos in our airports in December and January. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure you can understand my skepticism. Canada's ports, airports, and railways are a federal responsibility, and they're an absolute miserable state. A small but recent example of the Liberals' government's policy that's stymieing our transportation corridors and supply chains is the rolling truck age program. For some unfathomable reason, they were looking to ban perfectly legal trucks from picking up cargo in the Port of Vancouver for the sin of being 12 years or older, because trucks somehow moving less goods is somehow going to help the congestion. The good news is, Mr. Speaker, that the pressure worked and the program was postponed for a third time until at least next year, hopefully forever. Mr. Speaker, our ports need better than Bill C-33. Our railways need better, our shippers need better, our supply chains need better, our economy needs better, and Conservatives stand ready to deliver. Imagine a competent government that takes serious action on these burgeoning problems, that removes the gatekeepers, gets our ports back on track, fixes our airports. Mr. Speaker, if this bill is the best government can come up with after 8 years in office, it's time for them to step aside and let Conservatives fix the mess and unleash Canada's great potential for everyone. Thank you very much. Hey!